this episode, we focus on Kwentong Pagkain, or stories of food. Our guests will discuss how climate change impacts Philippine agriculture and how we can help ensure food security for all Filipinos. I am your host, Cato Sarmiento, Communications Manager at the Center. Joining our conversation are Ayn Torres, Knowledge Production Manager at the Center. Her research work experience covers climate change adaptation and resilience, agriculture and natural resources, and policy and economic development. Team Bicol Umalohokan, represented by Mavic Conde, is a group of communicators that has highlighted the practice of saving seeds as an example of people-led sustainable production and consumption practice. Team G-Unit, represented by EC Toledo, is another group of communicators who have highlighted how Nueva Ecija farmers are adapting to and mitigating the impacts of extreme weather events. And Christine Jodloman of AGREA, an innovative, inclusive, for-purpose agribusiness founded on sustainable agriculture, fair trade, and replicable model of an agri-based economy. Ayn, to help ground our conversation, what exactly does food security mean, and what does it mean to be food secure?
Good morning, everyone. So we always hear that one of the most important or most critical impacts of climate change is on the food security and agriculture, especially in the Philippines. And in the Philippines, when you that also covers fisheries, crop, livestock, and all the types of produce that's being domestically produced in our country. So when we say food security, ano ba to? Kailan ba to natin masasabi that there is food security in a country or in a locality? So there are three basic parts when you talk about food security. First is that all people at all times have physical, economic, and social access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. So food security should satisfy all the conditions. So it's not just a few people or even not just a majority of people, but that's all people at all times. And there should be that the food that's available should be economically affordable, accessible physically and socially if not possible. And of course, you don't just talk about the quantity of the food, but also the quality of the food on the table or what's accessible. So it's important that there's not just sufficient supply, but that supply is nutritious for the dietary needs of that person. However, in the IPCC report, just this 2022 in the working group 2 of AR6, the projection, at least for Asia, is that by 2050, local food accessibility could be reduced by as much as 3.2%. The percentage might be small, but that roughly translates to an estimated 300,000 deaths that's possible with the lack of food security in Asian countries. So ano ba yung mga impacts ng climate change to agriculture? So some of the most critical hazards of climate change to agriculture are extreme rainfall o yung sobrang daming pag-ulan, intense and more frequent storms, and even sea level rise o yung pagtaas ng dagat. So if you notice, those hazards are related to too much water or frequent rainfall and storms. But on the other end, there's also that hazard of extreme heat and warming temperatures. So both of these on the other ends highly impact our agriculture and fishery. So how no? So on the left end, flooded rivers or water sources naturally, of course, damage the crops. So pag binahayan, limas lahat ng pananim and there's going to be no crops that can be harvested. And on the other hand, and in the long run, soil erosion is also caused when there is extreme precipitation or rainfall, and that loss in fertility will eventually decrease the yield of our farmers in the next decades or so. So on the other hand, as I said, extreme heat naman also damages the crops. Of course, that lack of moisture, that dried up soil. So, and even in extreme cases, there can also be the potential of fires, and eventually it also increases the stress in plants. And warm temperatures are highly associated also with pests and diseases in agriculture. So all of these hazards, all of these impacts ultimately contributes to that drop in crop production. And of course, relatively the decreased income for farmers. So there's going to be decrease in food availability, and that affects not just the farmer who is relying also on their own crops for subsistence, but of course the food availability in the market or for the consumers. No? And then of course, without that security or availability of food, there's going to be decreased health and productivity, which ultimately can lead to loss of life. For fisheries, the same hazards actually apply. So there's extreme rainfall, intense storms, sea level rise, and even for really intense storms, there can be that storm surges, what you hear of during Typhoon Yolanda and Typhoon Conde the past in recent years. And on the other hand, again, extreme heat can also affect our fisheries. So in terms of extreme rainfall and sea level rise, intense storms, of course, our fishers have to reduce the time that they spend for fishing. Also, yung pag masyadong maulan, there's that possibility that the uplands or yung lupa from the upper parts of that landscape can increase siltation or sedimentation. So the runoffs actually go to the rivers, to the seas, and that affects, of course, the habitat of the fish. And in times of storms, naman, of course, there's that destruction of structures, not just the boats of the fishermen, but also the fish pens, fish cages for those who are involved in farming fish or what we call aquaculture. So in terms of extreme heat, similarly, there's reduced time spent in fishing kasi mainit na. They can't really go out from the same time that they spent previously. And then, of course, another costly adjustment that they have to do is they have to change the fishing methods because the habitats of the fish are affected. So yung lugar na kung saan nila natatagpuan yung maraming isda, they would have to move, they would have to create or establish new structures. So that also creates disruption of structures and schedules. And then also warming temperatures, again, also contribute to diseases and even invasive species of fish in the waters. So ultimately, all these impacts, kung napansin nyo, it's basically the same as with crops. So the reduced yield per catch of fish contributes to decreased income, decreased food availability, decreased health and productivity, and ultimately, whether that's directly or indirectly, to the loss of life. So now we ask ourselves, how do we increase food security specifically versus that trend of climate change? So when we talk about increasing food security versus climate change, we can broadly talk about it in terms of what can be done in the short run versus what can be done in the long run. So yung short run, we basically say that we have to diversify. And that diversification strategy not just apply to the kinds of crops that we farm, but also the kind of methods that's being used or the kind of practices that's being used by our farmers right now. So first, yung palagi pinopromote, if you hear about it, yung livelihood diversification. So we are saying na farmers and fishers alike need not rely on just one source of income, hindi lang pagtatanim, hindi lang pangingisda, but other off-farm and non-fishing livelihood sources then. Another is, of course, ensuring that there's agricultural insurances and fisheries insurances also for fishers. And that's also being pushed because especially in the light of all these intense storms na almost every year. And when if imagine if there's just 2 cropping seasons and nabawasan na yun, isang cropping season ka na lang per year, and then tamaan pa siya ng bagyo towards the end of the year or towards the middle part of the year during when you think you can already harvest, and then nasira lahat, then that translates basically to no income for the farmers for that year altogether. And then there are also methods where you can improve the practices. One of the things, and is becoming also adapted in the rural areas is that rainwater harvesting, no? Kasi nga extreme, meron kang tag-init, tas meron ka rin tag-ulan. So yung sobrang tubig, why not ipunin natin yon, and then pag dumating yung tag-init, no? Yun yung ginagamit nila pang irrigate ang ating crops. There are also utilization of research and technology to come up and develop drought-resistant and water-efficient varieties of crops. Even for fishes, there are species that are created then for varieties that are resistant to climate change. As mentioned, crop diversification. Kumbaga, hindi lang isang uri ng pananim, no? Because after that season, you would also be able to not just leave the land fallow, but also utilize it for more short-term crops. And then agroforestry for those that are situated in the uplands. What our farmers already do is that apart from the crops that they plant there, they also utilize trees or yung non-timber forest products that usually can even provide more income compared to the cash crops. And then lastly, of course, since our farmers need to adjust with the changing planting seasons, there are now new schedules, kumbaga, that we have to follow in terms of changing the timing of our planting depending on the climate. Now, in terms of the long run naman, no? So it's not because adapting can only bring our farmers and fishers to a certain point or to a certain state. But what has to be done is also look at the problem of climate change in the long run. So one of the things that need to be looked at is really that landscape approach to farming, because farming is not just you're not just contained to your specific plot or specific farmland. No, the farm that we take care of are also connected or interconnected with the whole landscape. That is to say, the watershed, the rivers, the seas. No, so both the farmers and the government should be able to work hand in hand in terms of the comprehensive use of the land, so that each ecosystem takes care of each other, kumbaga. It's also important, of course, to secure the natural resources, tenure, and property rights of our farmers and fishers. And it's not just to say that the long-term practices should be looked at by the producers, but also by consumers. No? So a change in consumption patterns can also be looked at in terms of how to fight or how to increase food security versus climate change. So there are the questions now: should we consume less meat? Should we consume local sources of food for more environmental or sustainable sourcing to help decrease that carbon emissions and also increase our environmental contribution. So yeah, that's it basically for climate change and food security.
Thank you so much, Ayn. I like how you're underscoring that food security is not just about food production, because normally what we hear online and in media is nakatutok sa food production or even what's available in the market. So in that way, food importation is a potential solution. But as you mentioned, impacts of climate change on Asia will result in a drop in outputs. So national self-sufficiency in terms of food production is important. Actually, naramdaman na natin ito nung pandemic, where when some countries limited their food exports for their own populations. We'll revisit the short-term and long-term solutions that you mentioned later. For now, we turn to our storytellers and advocates. Can you please introduce yourselves and the work that you are doing at the intersection of climate change and food security?
My name is Mavic Conde from Bicol, Umalohokan. So our group provides communication support for Filipino seed savers, and our campaign focused on saving seeds as a sustainable food production practice, and also how it serves as a climate solution. So again, our team is composed of Ayn Torres and Rome Candasa, also from they're also from Bicol. Okay, I mentioned it's about the practice of saving seeds. So we highlighted the masipag farmers. Masipag stands for magsasaka at siyentipiko para sa pag-unlad ng agrikultura, or in English, it's Farmer-Scientist Partnership for Development. So masipag advocates farmers' control over food production through agroecology. So agroecology means managing farmlands like ecosystem, just what Ayn said. So yung land use management, hindi lang yung mismong farm site ang may influence sa output and everything. So we pinopromote ng masipag na our farmers have to manage their farmlands like ecosystem. So central to it, we've learned that central to this approach is saving seeds, which involves saving, developing, and exchanging of free seeds among their members. So its collection so far of traditional rice varieties and farmer-bred seeds are distributed to its trial farms nationwide. And one of them is yung Tabi Farm, yung na-feature namin through our campaign. So Tabi Farm, bago lang na trial farm na member ng masipag. And so nakatanggap sila ng mga farmer save seeds from masipag, and since coastal village, susceptible sila or vulnerable sa sea level rise, saltwater intrusion, and so ayun, nung nag-trial farm sila, may 5 varieties na nag-survive within nung binaha sila. So nandun yung mataas yung high salinity level. So yun yung minas produce nila, and isa na yun sa na-distribute nila sa kanilang mga members. So pero hindi pa yun dun tapos, yung trial farming first step pa lang siya. So meron pang verification process. So yung mga interested kumuha sa kanila ng mga na-test sa trial farm is i-verify nila through kung bagay ba, magiging locally adapted ba sila sa kanilang sariling farmland. So mga tree cropping system pa, and then kung gusto nilang i-breed pa yon, so pwede din. May training din na pinoprovide yung masipag for them. So
Mavic, let me pause you there. You're going into a lot of solutions and details, so that might be good to compare with what EC and Christine might be able to share. For now, we'll go back to you, Mavic. For now, EC, can you let us know about your team and your campaign?
I'm EC Toledo of Philstar.com. Yung name namin na G-Unit is actually the team that pursues grants. Actually, kaya rin siya G-Unit kasi tuwing tinatanong namin ang isa't isa kung game ba tayo mag-apply, game ba tayo magpasa, sagot lang namin G. So anyway, we're also, kami rin yung grupo na always pursuing sa mga climate-related stories. Dahil nga po yung si Gea, yung reporter namin, actually is isa sa mga talagang sobrang obsessed na mag-pursue ng climate stories meron. And part of our team is also Jonathan De Santos, ang aming editor. So yung naging project ko namin sa Nueva Ecija talks about how Nueva Ecija farmers, so Nueva Ecija is one of the biggest rice producers in the country, is actually adapting to climate change. Kasi di ba alam natin na ang mga farmers, meron silang innate knowledge, meron silang instinct na tag-ulan ngayon, tag-init ngayon. So hindi na siya pwede ngayon dahil nga po nagbabago na yung cycle ng ating climate. Now may mga technology na ina-adapt sila ngayon, yung mga weather advisories, yung LGU nila, may mga nagsasuggest na rin ng yung change ng timing ng plantings as discussed by Ms. Annie kanina. So ina-adapt na po nila yun unti-unti. And in between cropping seasons, between harvest seasons, may mga ginagawa na rin silang iba para madagdagan yung income nila. So, ayun po. Pero other than that, yung climate reporting namin sa Philstar, we always make sure na pinapakita namin kung anong direct effect na to sa tao. Kasi kung makikita natin dati, like siguro 5-10 years ago, ang climate reporting sa atin is damages ng bagyo. Damages sa infrastructure, damages to crops. Ganun lang po. So ngayon, we're trying to make sure na kung ano ang direct effect ng climate change, not just bagyo, not just extreme weather events, pero anong direct effect ng climate change sa atin. So ang pinaka direct effect talaga niya sa atin, everyday Filipinos, ay food security. So, ayun po yung talagang pinaglalaban natin.
Maraming salamat, Conde. I think Christine has something to say with the stories you've shared kasi marami rin siyang experience. Christine, can you introduce yourself and your team?
Magandang araw po. Ako po si Christine Jodloman ng AGREA Foundation. So i-share ko lang po yung goal namin sa AGREA Foundation is to really create this replicable one island economy model. Kasi tayo po dito sa Pilipinas, we are an archipelagic nation. We are made up of 7,600 islands pero wala po sa mga isla na to ang sustainable in terms of food. And lalo na po ngayon yung food and climate is a very relevant topic kasi yung Pilipinas nakaka-experience po tayo ng 20 to 21 typhoons every year. At yung pinakaunang naapektuhan po, it's yung mga farmers natin and fisher folks. So sa AGREA Foundation po, our goal is to give and create this ecosystem that can help farmers po bring about yung ecology of dignity na tinatawag natin. At nasisimula po ito sa aming AGREA Farm School. So sa AGREA Farm School po, we offer courses sa agriculture, organic agriculture and sustainable regenerative practices at ini-integrate po namin dito yung climate change awareness at the same time diversification practices that can help farmers po mitigate the effects of climate change sa kanilang mga areas. So ngayon po we have more than 2,000 graduates sa aming AGREA Farm School sa Marinduque and we have about 500 graduates po sa iba naman like sa Laguna, sa Ilocos po we are just starting and ngayon po we have around 200 graduates din po sa Siargao. So nakita niyo po itong mga isla po ito siya and very much affected sila. For example, sa Marinduque po karamihan ng mga farmers ay mga coconut farmers. At tuwing bagyo po, nawawalan sila ng 10 to 15 na coconuts. So that's a loss of income for them. So ano po yung ginagawa namin is introducing them to new parang bagong coconuts po, yung mas shorter dwarf coconuts that can help them maano yung income nila at the same time to other diversified practices like yung farm tourism. So I will share later po yung iba pang mga best practices namin with our partner farmers. So maraming salamat po.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome again in Mavic, EC, and Christine. Babalikan ko si Mavic pati si EC. Your background is primarily in climate communication and reporting. When you initially started on your campaigns, ano yung mga stories na naririnig nyo from the farming communities that made you pursue your stories?
Okay, so ako yung naging, actually kakababad ko ata sa Twitter, nakita ko yung mga tweets about saving seeds. Na, sabi ko may ganun pala. So, minessage ko yung isang nag-post nun, tapos based in Benguet. May community seed library pero very rare siya dito sa Philippines. So, naging partnership yun with an NGO and yung local government ng Tublay. So, ayun na naisulot ko siya sa Incline na isang solutions-based platform. So, tapos dumating yung opportunity sa Balanghay Project. So, sabi, kasi hindi naman enough na isang story lang talaga. Especially, marami pa lang seed savers dito and sobrang interesting na mga kwento nila yung genetic diversification. Parang yung magiging yung kahit di ka naman nerd, parang may mabubuhay sa yung ganung ano. So yun talaga yung pinurso namin story for this. And then as Apple and Rome would always tell me, okay, sige, willing kaming hatakin mo dyan, sabi nila. So, ayun. So, sobrang dami pa talagang interesting na kwento from them. Hanggat maaari nga talaga, we just stay within our lane at sana nga sila na yung magkwento ng mga nila, yung mga ginagawa nila. Kaya pag may nagre-reach out din sa amin, in-emphasize namin na support group lang talaga kami. So hanggat maaari, yun, dinadirect namin sila sa kanila.
Thanks, Mavic. Pero yes, I don't think seed saving as a practice and even yung perspective of farmer scientists has been reported enough here in the Philippines. Ikaw naman, EC, how did you guys start pursuing the story on Nueva Ecija?
Actually po personally, yung pag-pursue ko ng story on food security is way back beyond pag-start ko pa sa media. It was actually kung si Mavic nagbabad sa Twitter, ako nakuha ko siya sa movies. Sa Interstellar. Kasi parang part ng movie na Interstellar was nauubusan na sila ng farmers. So, nag-flashback nung high school ako. Kasi I'm from Isabela, another region na medyo lakas ang farming. Among all my classmates, batchmates, wala sa amin ang interested sa agriculture. So part ng generation ko I was part of the generation na walang interest sa agriculture. So when I did my postgraduate, naging thesis ko siya na ano magiging effect na yung mga kabataan walang interest sa agriculture. So during the course of my thesis, this was way back 2015 pa. I think, ako po updated pa rin siya, pero ang average age ng farmers natin was 56 or 60 something. So medyo matanda na. So doon nagsimula yung obsession ko na i-pursue yung mga ganitong types of stories to get my generation or the future generation back to agriculture kasi agriculture. Right. And thankfully, yung mga kasama ko sa company namin, pare-parehas kami ng gusto. And it just so happens sa AGREA was into climate reporting, well, science reporting at that time. Tapos si Jonathan De Santos naman was medyo obsessed din sa agriculture and security. So, nagtuloy-tuloy yan. Nagsimula yan sa pagko-convert ng arable lands into subdivisions. tapos nagtuloy-tuloy yan sa pagko-convert ng ancestral and agriculture lands to, okay lang ba sabihin, yung nuclear city? So anyway, doon nagsimula yung yung path namin to yung pag-explore ng effects talaga. Kung ano yung mga ginagawa, yung mga man-made things na nakaka-affect sa food security, and directly nagpapambol ako. Dahil ginagawa natin itong mga to, yung pag-convert natin ng mga natural resources, yung pag-convert natin ng mga natural resources natin to something na, yun nga, subdivisions, buildings, is also directly affecting yung food security natin. And hindi pa kasama yung climate dun, kasi yung climate is another, ibang usapan pa siya. Kasi dati nga, when we talk about climate reporting, it's just about damages, pero hindi natin nasa sa agriculture damages, pero hindi pa natin nasasama yung effects ng yung ambient temperature. During our research sa story namin sa Umalohokan, we found out na yung ambient temperature natin, every time na nag-rise yun, nababawasan yung yield ng crops natin. So that's one thing that we should be aware of. Kasi I think yung presentation ni Ma'am Ayn kanina, by 2050, and that's really alarming. Kasi yung nasa study rin ng AGREA, by 2050, meron ng 1.5 degrees Celsius rise sa ambient temperature natin na magkakos ng 10% reduction sa crops natin. So, ayun. Kaya hindi siya usapang economy lang, hindi siya usapang agrikultura lang. It's really something na talagang directly affected lahat ng Pilipino.
Actually, I can relate to EC. My connection in agriculture goes long way and very personal to me. My parents are farmers. I grew up in a rural farm in North Cotabato. And nung college, while doing our thesis, dapat sabi ng prof namin, yung thesis mo, kasi gagawin mo siya ng 1 year, dapat it should be very relevant to you and to your community. So yung napili ko po, since I have a communications background also, is communicating climate-smart rice varieties to farmers in our areas. And during my survey, yung mga data gathering, I found out na yung mga farmers sa area namin ay tumatanda na. Karamihan sa kanila mga 50s to 60s, and I researched about it. The average age of farmers that time, 2016, was 57. And yung tinanong ko po sila during focus group discussion, ano yung obserbasyon nila, bakit maliit na lang yung kabataang farmer sa area namin. Sabi nila sila mismo yung nag-encourage po sa mga anak nila na huwag pumunta sa agriculture kasi mahirap po yung agriculture, both economically and physically. Kasi naranasan na po nila, ayaw nilang maranasan ng mga anak nila yon. So parang it struck me very personally that time, and it has become a personal mission of mine to really contribute to agriculture development. And for 8 years po, I have been organizing yung mga capacity building programs for farmers sa area namin. And ngayon po sa AGREA na kami na po yung nag-develop ng mga capacity building programs for farmers, and I feel na to do more, specifically ngayon na very challenging yung ating agriculture sector, and I'm into 2 areas po. First is including more youth in agriculture. The second one is including more women in agriculture, and that's what we have been intentionally doing in AGREA, because the future po is in these 2 sector kasi hindi sila included right now Agriculture in the Philippines right now is really male dominated, and including the youth and women in agriculture would help us to the future of food security. Tayo po dito sa Pilipinas, we're around 110 million people, and yung mga farmers natin pakonte na ng pakonte. Imagine 10 to 20 years from now, sino na po yung magpapakain sa atin? So 110 million people po, no, that's the business of agriculture, to feed this population. And we should do more with less resources now, and we should be smart about it. So napaka-integral ng ginagawa ni EC and ni Mavic in communicating climate change in agriculture, so that these stories, these narratives could reach yung ating mga policy leaders, ating mga local government officials to really nabigyan ng focus yung ating agriculture sector po. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Ayn?
Yeah, so definitely agree with Christine, and siguro to leverage then on what our guests have already mentioned. Nabanggit kanina ni EC na hindi lang kasi climate change yung problema ng food security. And definitely that's a 100% yes. Kasi it's already a complex development issue from the get-go, itong food security, no? Kasi nalilayer pa na environmental, gender, economic, other issues, no? Tapos usually when you go to the ground and you talk about climate change, syempre sabihin yan, wala akong pakila kasi malayo sa sikmura, di ba? When you use these terms, these concepts, it's really hard to understand. But then you always talk about climate change kasi in the context of development and how climate change is exacerbating what's already been our problem for hundreds and hundreds of years. So so in surfacing the stories of community action, best practices, palagi natin sinasabi sa development, laging recommendation ng mga scholars natin, we have to scale up best practices. We have to replicate. Pero saan mo hahanapin yung best practices na yun, no? Where do you find that? So parang may nakikita kasi akong gap, no? Parang people who have that access to these best practices don't always have the platform to be able to tell their stories or share these practices. And at the same time, yun namang nagsasabi na hanapin natin yun. Di naman nila mahanap these people who are doing already these best practices. No? So it's really important to be able to support each other para maging connected siya and ano no. So in our work na in increasing food security. So ang classic example niya no yung ating mga indigenous farming communities no where they're all over the country. We all know that, and since they're very very close to nature talaga. Hindi pa natin pinag-uusapan ang climate change in the mainstream. They already know about it, at least concept-wise. They are already adapting to it. No? So, kumbaga, they have that best practices na talaga. But their stories don't really get surfaced. So, it's really important na palabasin itong mga kwento ng komunidad natin because it provides that real-life, concrete examples na hindi lang natin makikita sa papel. But people will know of the benefits and inspire, kumbaga itong innovations na maaari nating i-adapt. And sinasabi ni Mavic kanina kasi diba, when you talk about innovation, there are starters, but there are also laggards. And the laggards don't really step up. Laggards nga, diba? Kumbaga hanggat hindi nila alam na gagana, hindi nila susubukan. So it's really important to connect these gaps and communicating the best practices in our agriculture. Yun.
Salamat, no? I find it interesting that we're actually talking about several areas. EC is talking about Nueva Ecija, Mavic is in Bicol, si Christine Marinduque, Ilocos, Laguna, Siargao. And when we talk about climate risks and impacts, may sinasabi tayong kailangan localized. Ang solution for that area is localized. I think nabanggit ni Christine na in a coastal agri area, iba yung needs nila kaysa sa upland area. But at the same time, you're all talking about developmental concerns in agri that actually extend beyond geographic borders. I think that's what Ayn was trying to say, na beyond the localized climate risks, which is needed to find the appropriate solution for that area, there are greater developmental challenges at play. Kasama na dyan yung how are we encouraging the youth to be involved in the sector? How can we support women farmers? If I might go back to Mavic and EC, are all of these things that are being discussed resonating with your stories?
I can go first po. Actually, I just like to react yung story ni Christine kanina about how yung mga farmers themselves are not encouraging their children not to go to farming. Kasi I was talking to a farmer, this was in 2018. Ito, he owns a land. He owns a huge chunk of land. So well-off siya. They're a farming family na well-off. Mayaman na sila, pero siya mismo ayaw niyang mag-agriculture yung anak. So kung yung mga well-off na farmers ganito, how much more yung mga not so well-off? Kasi ang nangyayari, and this goes din sa lahat ng na-interviews namin, not just sa Nueva Ecija, Isabela, or even sa Cavite. Ang hirap kasi sa farmers is umiikot ang, nakaasa sila sa loans. And the problem with that, ang hirap makaharap ng loans kapag high risk yung industry mo. Now, may mga bangko naman na nagpapautang sa mga rural banks na nagpapautang sa ganyan. Pero, ano nangyayari? Like, for example, kung dumaan ng bagyo, mayroon bang insurance na yung mga extreme weather events nasasakop yung damages sa kanila? So, yun yung mga nuances sa farming industry na hindi masyadong na-explore. And isa pa is another thing pala. Yung sabi about localizing solutions. One thing na napansin namin sa Nueva Ecija is wala siyang direct access sa fresh water. So, yung mga farmers doon, may mga well, didig sila ng well. So, para palabas yung tubig sa well, nagpa-pump sila. And yung mga pump na ito, gumagamit ng mga motor ng pump. So, gumagamit ng diesel. So, akala namin, well ako, personally, akala ko, when you say effect ng mataas na presyo ng gas o diesel, akala ko is yung pagtra-transport from farm to market. So apparently, doon pa lang sa farming, doon pa lang sa pagtatanim pa lang, pag may maintain pa lang nung crops mo, may effect na yung prices ng diesel or gas. Kasi by the gallon sa usapan ng consumption nila para paganahin yung pump nila. And maganda rin po yung nabanggit ni Mr. kanina about sa rainwater harvesting. Kasi may mga areas pa rin sa Pilipinas na walang ganun. Kasi di ba, ang aim na naman natin dapat is 100% ng farm ay irrigated. Now, para sa mga hindi pa irrigated, ideally, pag-harvest ng rainwater, pero hindi pa rin kasi siya available sa lahat. So, karamihan ng mga areas na ganito is nakaasa sa well, sa mga pump. Now, kung hindi sila gagamit ng yung motor na pinapatakbo ng gas or diesel, manual labor nila yan, which is mahirap, lalo na kapag tag-init. So, magkakaiba po talaga yung mga problems sa flat, which is sa Nueva Ecija. Kapag punta mo naman sa Isabela, nandun yung Cagayan River, nandun yung Magat Dam, na flooding naman ang problema, excess water problema. So, paiba-iba po talaga yung every region na puntahan namin, paiba-iba yung nagiging problema.
Okay, so ayun nabanggit ni Easy yung production cost. Ito common ito sa lahat ng farmers regardless nung kung ano yung localized problem nila. So, ito is isa sa case studies na pinablish ng Global Alliance for the Future of Food is yung yung program ng Masipag. Ito yung naging isa sa featured na practices showing na food systems transformation is not only possible but it's already happening. So nabanggit doon yung production cost is sobrang kasi nga marami subsistence farmers sila, di ba? Tapos mangungutang, may magpapautang, babagyo, malulubog palalo sila sa But with this approach, kung may seeds silang available, may seeds na resilient, and agroecology yung approach nila, so it reduces ayun na nga, food production cost, lower production costs. Tapos, siyempre nako-compensate siya with resilient seeds. So, nagkakaroon na pag kinumpare mo, may study rin silang kinommission is pag kinumpare mo between chemical-based monocrop farming and these agroecological practices, mas okay pa yung income nila, and then mas yun nga, nababuffer yung impact nung climate change and other extreme weather events na nararanasan natin ngayon. And meron na rin silang mga climate resilient rice varieties, pest resilient. Kasi nga, with agroecology, it is as much as possible zero external input siya. So talagang gagamitin mo kung ano yung within that ecology, yung mga indigenous na mga uod, microorganisms, yun yung mga yun din i-enhance mo lang. And then 'di ba, yung insight din na sobrang natutunan ko talaga is sobrang nakatutok tayo sa number of yields lang as metrics for our food production, when in fact maraming mga hidden benefits, like yun nga, kapag inaalagaan yung soil, mas nape-prevent din yung yung erosion, mga disasters. Hindi yung nakakount natin sa mga benefits ng food systems natin. Tapos ayan din na upheld yung traditional indigenous practices, yung role ng women, especially dito sa Masipag, and the youth, nabanggit na is, they're into na-expose na sila sa pag-breed ng rice. Actually sa Kamsur and sa Negros province, may mga bagong mga bagong salta sila, mga kabataan na nag-join na sila sa trial farming. But yes, still affected pa rin sila kasi nga last time na na-wash out yung nila, yung community seed library kasi 'di ba kung wala namang support, mga ano-ano, mga kubo-kubo rin lang 'yan. Pero yun nga kapag may access sa seeds, ah hindi na nila poproblemahin pa yung mga ano, yung yung gasolina, yung pagtaas nito at paano sila naapektuhan para lang makapagtanim, makapag-produce ng food hindi lang sa kanilang pamilya at sa kanilang komunidad.
Salamat, Mavic. Balikan ko lang yung ano, for the seed saving. So parang for the farmer scientists that you were able to work with and interview. So it's kind of like, tama ba? Intendi ko, para silang barter trade system that they reassure that this kind of seed works for this kind of climate. Tama ba?
Yes, kasi mutual aid yung ano, yung pinopromote ng agroecology, coordination and co-creation of knowledge. So even out niya yung playing field among, kasi madalas sinasabi ang scientific lang yung ginagawa ng mga ano, ng mga scholars. So eto, in-even out niya yung ano na they work together. So yun nga talagang participatory yung approach nila. And actually, meron na nga tayong batas yung participatory guarantee system. And kaya lang wala pa ata until now yung IRR, which is hinihintay nga. Pero bago nito, meron ng ilang LGUs na nagpapatupad. So maganda rin talagang mahanap natin sila and ano yung mga methods and process nila. Kasi sila rin yung talagang pinagbasehan nung paglabi nitong PGS. So I think one is sa Davao meron and sa Quezon Province. And yung tatlo, nakalimutan ko, but ano, less than 10 sila.
So it's kind of like an informal network, no? Of are these cooperatives and smallholder farmers?
Ay, yeah, parang yung masipag yung umbrella organization nila of smallholder farmers that practice agroecology and communal farming.
How about the farmers that you looked at, EC? Are they organized in some way?
One of our recent stories po was a group of farmers sa Cavite, sa Lupang Ramos. Nabanggit ni Mavic yung communal farming. Actually, maganda yung story nila dito. During the 2020-2021 lockdown, kasagsagan talaga ng lockdown, what they did was, meron silang parang communal na pantry. Lahat ng mga produce nila, so not just rice, meron silang saging, meron silang patatas, kamote, iniipon nila yon. Tapos, yun yung kinokonsume nila. Tapos, naging self-sufficient yung barangay na ito, yung community na ito, na naging, actually during that time, wala silang meat. Sila yung naging, yung mga kinakain, yung consumption nila that time was out meat. Yung niluluto nila as parang lasang karne, yung mga gulay, something like that. So, yes, some of the farmer groups na kinausap namin are organized. Yung iba, I think this was in Rizal naman. No. Again, in Cavite. So, this was in Lupang Ramos in Cavite. So, marami naging problem. So, yung lupa nila, hindi sa kanila, they're still waiting for para sa decision para ibigay sa kanila yung lupa. Tapos, nandyan din yung issues ng, dahil nga organized yung grupo nila, nandyan yung issues ng, red tagging. Meron silang president, yung structure nila, yung SecGen, tapos yung barangay nila mismo, sila na rin yung nag-organize ng pamimigay kasi nga dahil self-sufficient sila, may mga sobra silang food. Yun na rin yung mga parang, sila na rin yung namimigay sa ibang barangay. Now, yung ibang mga pinuntahan din namin, ito na pala yun. Yung sa Rizal, organized din, almost the same. Sila rin naman yung involved sa agroforestry. Tapos, since medyo nasa paanan sila ng bundok, sila na rin yung nag-i-implement ng mga projects ng local DNR and local DA doon. So yes po, may mga farm groups, if not almost all, mga nakausap namin are organized.
That sounds great. Given the issues that all of you have raised, nabanggit ni Christine pati ni Ayn yung trying to surface best practices and trying to build capacities in different groups, may development issues, aside pa from the actual climate risks and impacts, having some way to organize seems to be something that could help them kasi nga ang complex ng issues na hinaharap ng sektor. Perhaps I can jump to Christine kasi ang daming I was going to ask ano yung mga underreported pero sa pagkukwento nyo ang daming lumalabas. Christine, AGREA has been lauded for being an inclusive business that empowers farmers and communities. Given all of these challenges, ano yung insights and advice that you can share from the AGREA experience?
Yes po, thank you po. So ang pinaka-first po, there should be localized solutions as have shared no ni Ms. A, ni ECN, ni Mavic. Kasi po there's no one size fits all when it comes to solutions in agriculture. So what we do in AGREA po, before we engage in a partner farming community, we first do community participatory mapping because solutions should be co-created with a community. Hindi kami sa AGREA masasabi na this is the solution, ito yung gagawin. No po. We in AGREA at first, we really engage with the community and co-create the solution with them. So what we did po, we focus on 3 areas. First is the governance and social components. Yung community ba, merong farming association and cooperative because ito po talaga very important kasi when you are just an individual smallholder farmer, masyado pong mahirap kasi hindi ka papakinggan. Mas maganda po merong platform like associations and cooperative para mas malakas yung boses ng mga farmers. And lahat po kasi ngayon ng mga government and private sector support, nagpo-funnel yun siya sa mga nakafocus talaga sa associations at cooperatives. Kasali din po sa tinitingnan namin dito sa governance and social components is may access ba sila? First, sa infrastructure. First is water access, which is very important in agriculture. Second is access to market. No? Nagpo-produce ka nga ng produce pero walang market, so bali wala po yun. Third is the third aspect would be meron ba silang access sa mga seeds, no? Yung mga agriculture input, saan sila kumukuha, saan sila bumibili. So lahat po iyon tinitingnan namin at first. Then the next component po would be economic component. Magkano po yung monthly income nila? Saan napupunta yung monthly income? Karamihan ba napupunta for the family or napupunta sa farm? The next po would be ano yung mga income nila or ano yung pinagkakabalihan nila basta off-season. Kasi sa agriculture meron po tayong tinatawag na off-season. Like for example po sa rice, 3 months yung rice no, tapos magpapahinga po dapat yung lupa. Then ano po yung ginagawa ng mga farmers during that time? Sa coconuts naman po, ganun din. Ano yung pinagkakabalahan ng farmers at pinagkakitaan nila during off-season. So, inaano din po namin sa AGREA. Then, the economic component, titignan din po namin kung ano yung pinakamalaking gastos nila sa food ba. And tinitingnan din po namin yung accessibility nila sa bank. Meron ba silang bank? Kasi financial access is a very important component po sa agriculture, access to finance. Yung access nila sa mga loans should be very mababa lang dapat yung interest. And karamihan po ng mga farmers so far that we have engaged with, wala po talaga silang mga bank accounts, no? They are unbankable and they don't have really the confidence to be farmer entrepreneur kung wala silang mga banks, no? Kasi po ang una kung mag-apply ka ng bank account or ATM, napakalami pong requirements and medyo nawawalan ng confidence yung farmers na pumasok sa bank and napakaraming IDs po na kailangan. And one best example po that we can share with this is yung aming farming community sa Mahay, Laguna. We have trained 165 farmers po, including youth and women, no? And 110 of them don't have bank accounts. Kaya ang pinaka-main reason po nila kasi malayo yung bangko or wala po silang income, no, wala silang savings to put in the bank. So yung ano rin po ng savings very important for the farmers. Paano sila paano nila i-delegate yung income nila na this is for the family, this is for the farm. So yun din po yung tinuturo namin sa aming financial inclusion program po sa AGREA. So 110 po na yun, natulungan po namin mga 64 to have their first bank account through the help and support of BPI Foundation. Meron po silang BPI Banko, no? And the third component po that we are looking sa aming community mapping activity is the environmental component. We really put emphasis po sa environment. So actually po, AGREA is a combination of two words, agriculture and Gaia, which is Greek for Mother Earth. So we want our farmers to be parang mga stewards of the environment, not the other way around. So sa environment po, tinitingnan namin po ano yung mga current challenges nila sa climate change. Meron ba silang mga food waste na tinatawag? So example po ng food waste ngayon is, kasi malaki rin po yung impact ng food waste sa ating climate. During the pandemic po, kung naalala nyo, yung lockdown was announced March of 2020, which is a very important season for the farmers kasi harvest season po yon. So nung nagkaroon po ng lockdown, parang limited lahat yung galaw, no? Hindi nakakapag-move or mobilize yung farmers to market their products, specifically here sa Metro Manila. So karamihan po sa kanila, kung maalala nyo sa news dati, gabundok ng kamatis yung tinatapon, gabundok na carrots, na cabbages, and loss of income po yun for the farmers. At the same time, loss of, napakalaking impact din po yun sa ating climate kasi it's a wasted na pinaghirapan po nila. So ginagawa din po namin sa AGREA is to help diversification practices for the farmers, value-added products. For example, what you can do with a tomato, for example, that the tomato can live longer. So yung mga tomato paste, mga tomato sauce po, so that the farmers can have additional income during off-season. At the same time, mapapahaba rin po yung buhay ng tomatoes. So yun po yung first insight, yung community mapping. Second po is yung shinare ko din kanina is including really yung more youth and women sa agriculture para po mas lumakas pa yung sector sa ating agrikultura at yung future po ng agriculture, hindi tayo medyo kakabahan kasi yung youth included na po. And the third one that we can share po sa insight po siguro is collaborate, no? Let's not work on silos po. There are many organizations that are doing best practices and it's best po na discussions like this, mag-usap-usap tayo and we look for ways to collaborate. We collaborate with the government, with the private sector, with the farming communities and associations para lahat po tayo when it comes to discussions on food and climate, align po tayo at hindi tayo gumagawa ng iba't ibang mga initiatives na hindi po mag-work. So we should work po on the best practices. Maraming salamat po.
Thanks, Christine. I think Mavic has a comment, pero before you speak, Mavic, merong phone-in question. Dahil na pag-uusapan, di ba, we're talking about seed saving and empowering farmers, self-sufficient communities, nabanggit ni EC, and then the community mapping scheme that Christine mentioned. Medyo pa-explain lang ng kaunti kasi uso yung term. Ayn and Christine, what exactly does fair trade mean and what does that look like?
Yung food value chain po kasi natin napakahaba and it starts with a simple seed which is yung advocacy ni Ma'am Mavic. And during pa lang po sa seed, during the production hanggang sa marketing, all of the stakeholders po ng food value chain should have a dignified and fair approach, lalong-lalo na po on the end of the food producers natin. At the same time, yung consumers, tayo pong lahat. And eating po actually is an agriculture act. And lahat po tayo is actually should be concerned with food security. And fair trade po, as you have mentioned, Ma'am Kato, no? And it should be really integrated po sa ating mga responsible business conduct. Meron po tayong tinatawag na responsible business conduct na hindi po dapat yung mga traders parang treat yung ating mga food producers ng hindi tama. So, no. For example po, we have actually experienced this sa marami sa aming farming communities. Hindi alam po ako mga mag-drop ng names, pero yung ang tawag po nila, local term nila sa Laguna sa trading is viajeros. No, they call it viajeros kasi they example lang po to really explain fair trade. Binibili po nila yung produkto ng farmers, halimbawa po sayote for example, that's 4 pesos per kilo of sayote. And itong mga farmers namin partner farmers namin sa Laguna, gumagamit pa po sila ng kabayo para mababa yung kanilang mga sayote from the mountains. And ang bayad po nila sa kabayo, it's 2 pesos. So 2 pesos na lang po yung matitira sa farmers. So ito po, this is a bad example of fair trade. And this should be parang communicated more to stop this, to really stop this process or stop this practice, kasi yung farmers po natin yung nahihirapan. And itong mga biyaheros po kasi, for example, they have the access kasi sa logistics, they have the access to market. Kaya po napapahaba yung ating value chain dahil po sa mga traders po na who are treating farmers unfairly. So example lang po yon sa explanation on what fair trade is. But what we can share po sa AGREA is to stop this process, to really empower yung mga farmers po to have access to connect them to market, to finance. Kaya yun po yung ginagawa namin sa AGREA, so that they would not be dependent so much on the traders, and they should have access to the market price. Kasi wala po silang alam na ganito pala yung presyo ng ganito. So ang ginagamit po namin is yung sa regulated price ng Department of Agriculture, sinishare namin sa aming mga partner farmers para malaman nila and maging transparent na ito po yung presyo ng gulay nyo ngayon. So wag po kayong papayag na ibenta yan na mas mababa pa dyan. So yun po yung for me yung fair trade. Thank you po.
Thanks, Christine. Ayn, would you like to add to that?
Well, Christine already explained it very well kasi she also has that kumbaga on-ground experience. But yes, if you notice, it's always been a term that's been used mostly in the West. Kasi nauso to even in the 1950s. Tapos, syempre, the West kasi imports a lot from developing countries, especially from Africa, ganyan. So, there are, kumbaga, middlemen and women, to be politically correct, na dadalhin yung produkto and then gonna sell to you like super, super high price. So, and applying that to the whole value chain, not just of travelers, but of traders themselves, no? On that end, yun nga, kasi dito, we know that fair trade is kumbaga a practice that's also been promoted. On the other end naman, and fair trade kasi is a certification that you get from third-party accreditors, kumbaga. Dito sa Pilipinas, meron tayong emerging naman na certification na tinatawag natin sustainability certification, and that just doesn't touch on the value chain or supply chain. It's also from the sourcing, ganyan, katulad ng dinidescribe ni Christine kanina. Now that sustainability certification kasi, it's really, really tedious kasi double-edged sword siya. Kumbaga, it's great to be certified, but at the same time, the requirements kasi of these certifications, whether it's fair trade, sustainability, is very tedious. Like there's this COCOA sustainability certification that we were studying from a past project, and then it's really to the details. Now, for example, apart from the sustainable sourcing of the cocoa seedlings in the farm, for example, yung CR daw ng farmer natin, meron bang maayos na water source? Is it disaggregated men and women? Parang ganon. Paminsan, there are certain standards na, okay, the farmers, if they're, subsistence farming or something, and to be able to get that premium of a fair trade or sustainability certification, you're not even gonna think of getting on the paperwork because of a lot of so yun, parang even before we get to that point, sabi nga ni Cristino, let's get back to basics. Ano ba yung mga components na kailangan nating suportahan institutionally and participatorily, as Mavic has mentioned. Yun na.
Ang takeaway ko dito, so parang pag sinabi pa lang farm to table, it might not necessarily be a good thing. The question is, really, yes, farm to table, pero ano yung value chain, pati yung logistics that went into it. But it's still better to buy local and try to find out saan ba talaga nang bumula yung binibili nating gulay at pagkain, no? Balik lang ako sa mga Umalohokan fellows. It's been, sabi natin, easy. It's almost a year since you did your campaigns. How were your stories and campaigns received by the communities and the public? Alam niyo ba kung how the farmers are that you talk to, how they're doing now?
Honestly, ma'am, sa dami ng mga napunta namin, wala pa po kami nagagawang follow-up. Pero ang naging effect po nito is mostly sa amin on how we report the effects of climate change to food security. Na mas talagang yung pagiging aggressive namin in pursuing stories like this and how we report it, hindi na siya puro bagsak lang ng facts, hindi lang siya puro bagsak ng scientific terms. It's about getting the message across na. Doon na kami nakafocus ngayon. Kasi ito yung sakit ng science reporting way back na masyadong scientific, masyadong academic, masyadong technical. So the thing is, we should let people know na hindi lang ito issue ng academic, hindi lang ito issue ng policymakers. Issue natin ito. Kasi nga, mabuti nga ngayon na pag-uusapan na ang effects ng food security and climate change kasi directly affected ang isa't isa yan. So yun po yung nagbago sa amin. And hopefully sa policy makers din po. Natawa ako sa kwento ni Christine kanina na dapat aligned tayo, walang initiatives. Kasi yung isang story naman namin sa Rizal, may mga projects, yung local DA, na hindi ma-implement ng farmers kasi nga, yung binibigay naman nilang seeds, yung mga binibigay nilang crops na dapat itanim, hindi pwedeng mag-grow sa mountainside. So, ang laki ng pera, ang laki ng budget, nasasayang. So, ano ba naman yung mag-usap kayong dalawa? Diba? Tanungin mo yung farmers doon. Paano ba talaga nag-work? So, yeah, dapat align, dapat nagko-collaborate, dapat may communication between the policy makers and yung mga farmers na nag-implement. So, ayun po talaga yung in-explore natin ngayon na yung coordination between the government and mga nag-implement, which is farming groups, dapat may aligned sila.
Mavic?
So before po I share about our update, I'd like to thank Christine and Ayn for the great explanation about fair trade and kung sa nag-phone in po ng question. Thank you. So sa amin naman, I think early this year na-receive na nung Tabi Farm yung award nila kasi na-nominate and nanalo sila ng award. Although hindi namin alam kung sino nag-nominate, but yes, sa Bangon Awards ng Human Nature for their 13th year anniversary. And then, continuous yung campaign namin kasi na-carry over siya through the lead fellowship ng Solutions Journalism Network. So, now, we are able to commission stories not just from the Philippines but from Asia. So, may isa na kami story na labas and it's the seed savers from India. And, yun, nagpa-practice sila ng 12 grains farming system sa isang rain-fed na farms and traditional yung crops nila. And then, yun, ang isa sa naging takeaway ko doon is yun nga, yung mga plant-based na protein sources are better in adapting and mitigating climate change. And isa sa climate change problem ng India is yun nga, yung animal farming. So malaki yung emission nila doon. And yun, pwede yun mag-offer ng solutions on how to do more with provide nutritious food ng hindi na gaano reliant sa animal farming. So, and yes, pina-follow up namin sila every time binabagyo yung mga farmers, mini-message ko sila, and then yun nga, sa Nueva Ecija nila kami na-connect. May store din kaming upcoming part din itong fellowship sa Negros Occidental naman. Yung farmer bread seed from Bicol, paborito, sabi kasi na masipag, paborito talaga siya ng mga masipag farmers all through the country. So naghanap kami ng example. And dun nga, yung last time na nabagyo sila ng Odette, sabi nila, compare daw sa isang chemical-based monocrop na high-yielding variety. Nag-survive yung karamihan sa seed ni yung PBB ni Mr. Pipito Bibabasa. So,
Okay. Habang lumalalim tayo sa usapan, no, dumadami ulit yung developmental concerns. But thank you for all of your inputs. You've actually raised a lot of, you've identified a lot of gaps and barriers that are keeping farmers from thriving. At hindi lang dahil sa climate change. But you're also surfacing a lot of what you think support the farmers would need. Before I ask my final question to the group, Ayn, balik ko lang sa'yo. So when we talk about the Philippines is still seen as a primarily agricultural economy. With the changing climate, does the Philippines retain its agricultural potential? How can we try and ensure continued support for farmers and continued food security for all?
Thank you for your question. Actually, ang laking debate ng statement na Philippines is still an agricultural country, but from an economic point of view kasi the productivity has been very, very low. So hindi na siya, kumbaga technically, hindi na siya consider, but that remains to still be a debate. I mean, we can still turn it around kasi hindi naman nababago yung country, yung geographic makeup natin eh. We are in a very, very good position on the equatorial belt. Tropical country, lots of land, lots of inland waters and, seas. So ang laki ng potential. And again, the developmental issue of that degradation is exacerbated more by climate change. But it's not to say that we cannot turn it around, no? And that's where we start. And apart from everything that we've already talked about, and yung mga kailangan ng farmers, I mean, it's all systemic changes that we need. And I think I just want to emphasize at this point na kung ano yung kailangan natin, it's really recognizing what each other can do. Kasi lahat tayo may magagawa. It's not just the government. We can't put the blame on them. We can't just put the blame on the farmer father or mother telling the children not to farm anymore. We cannot, put the blame on any other else na involved sa problema ito because again, farmers can do something. The public sector can do something. The private sector can do something. And of course, communicators, as we are talking right now, can do something in surfacing that the stories and the best practices. So, I think it's that we start with that recognition of what we can do. And it's not even a question of when to do it, but it's always now.
Thanks, Ayn. That's a perfect intro to my last question for all of you, and take turns. Given all of these challenges and given all of the potential, because despite the many challenges, the stories from Mavic, EC, and Christine, you're actually providing a lot of hope. There's actually a system that you're proposing. We know that it works in certain groups already. It's just a matter of, as Ayn put it, scaling it up. So for each one of you, what is the climate dream that you have for our country's agricultural sector and our farmers? Kung baga, merong 2050, 2030 goals ng net zero at kung ano-ano. Sa inyong version, what would be your dream of what happens in 2030 or 2050 for our agri sector and farmers?
For me, is to return stolen land. Kasi with all these talks about food sovereignty, agroecology, regenerative agriculture, all this will not happen without farmers having their own lands to till. Yun lang po.
For me, it's 100% self-sufficiency sa agricultural products, not just rice. Kasi to be fair, mataas ang rice sufficiency natin. Compared last year, 85% tayo ngayon. Pero still lower than the previous years. Kasi may time nag-95 tayo. The thing is, kahit mataas ang rice self-sufficiency natin, yung ibang products hindi. Ang biggest na ini-import natin is garlic. Yan hilig natin mag-isa, mag-fried rice. So, let's say mataas ang self-sufficiency natin sa rice, pero yung iba, like, not just yung mga tinatanim. Beef, even yung ibang karne, mahal pa rin ang magiging produkto, magiging cost ng pagkain. So, 100% food self-sufficiency and better life for farmers na sana magkaroon ng isang financial institution, isang system na magsusupport sa kanila kahit technically high risk talaga yung industry. And yes, tama yung sinabi ni Mavic. Ibigay natin ang lupa sa farmers. Huwag natin gawing subdivision.
Thank you, EC. Ayn, Christine?
So my dream po is to really have dignified Filipino farmers and fisher folks who are climate stewards and who have the capacity to do more with less resources by producing nourishing food for all Filipinos. Kasi po when we talk about food security, hindi lang po yung food access, sinabi rin nga po ni Ms. Ayn kanina, yung healthy and nourishing food, which is very important. Speaking 20 or 30 years from now, nourished workforce would be very important po, not just for the farmers, but for all Filipinos. Thank you.
Salamat, Christine. Ayn?
Daming gustong target, pero siguro to wrap everything up, one day, kumbaga, my dream is that we are in a society where the farmers are proud to be farming. Hindi nila kinahihiya na magsasaka sila at hindi rin kinahihiya ng anak ng mga magsasaka na yun ang kinabubuhay nila. And that can only happen if everyone supports that sector in priority and in urgency.
Thank you so much. I thought I had an idea about how climate change impacts agriculture and food security, but I learned so much from this conversation. I think the three takeaways that I have is food security is not just about food production. And while food sufficiency is not the end all, national self-sufficiency is very important. Second, when we talk about climate change and agriculture, it's not just about localizing risks. That's a big part in terms of the actual farming. But there are actually a lot of developmental concerns and challenges to production costs that are not necessarily just a local concern. And I think third, for us consumers, it's really important to understand where our food comes from and how it gets to our table. We won't be able to completely support our farmers if we refuse to take a look at that. How do we know if a price is competitive, if the food is good, if we don't understand where our food is coming from? Thank you so much for this conversation. We would like to thank our esteemed guests for the Kwentong Pagkain episode. Ayn Torres of the Lopez Center, Mavic Conde of Team Bicol Umalohokan, EC Toledo of Team G-Unit, and Christine Jodloman of AGREA.